Hello everyone. Sorry about that. Today we are going to be looking at a very interesting game played by two chess geniuses, Amelia Watson with the black pieces and Takanashi Kiara with the white pieces. Now Amelia Watson is very obviously the favorite in this game since, with Takanashi Kiara being a chicken and all, what chance do you really stand against an ace detective when you are just a chicken? I believe it's been said that both players were in their chess club at one point, so that roughly means that they're grandmaster, or rather super grandmaster level now. In all seriousness though, don't take this video too seriously. There's gonna be some jokes and things like that, but it's pretty clear that this is a very casual game between these two. Both of them don't really know how the pieces move or what they're called, so yeah, needless to say, this wasn't a very serious match, so don't take what I say too seriously. I'm just gonna be joking around. Also, if you are a fan of the channel, you may notice that this video format is not the first time I'm doing this, and yes, Tommymator is making its grand return. If you haven't seen my other video analyzing the chess in Code Geass, I strongly recommend you watch it. If you've seen Code Geass, you know that chess is a very prevalent symbol, and I analyze a few games that actually take place in the anime. Be sure to check that one out. That video took a lot of effort, and this one did as well, so I'd ask that you please consider subscribing to the channel for more content similar to this. And one final thing that I want to get out of the way, I may not be the best chess player. Anyways, let's get started. C3 is played, and then Amelia plays H6. Now this is of course the famous detective's defense that not many people know how to play very well, but Watson Amelia is of course one of those players. And then H4 is played, of course the famous accelerated chicken and one of Kiara's favorite openings to play. Next is A5. Now you may be wondering what that move accomplishes. Next is F4. Now this is marked as a mistake by the engine, and it says that E4 is the best, just gaining some center control, developing pieces, you know, the like. But moving on, then A6 is played, and this is marked as another mistake. Generally speaking, you don't want to move your rook out too soon, you want to keep it in the back ranks defending the king. And by doing this, the rook is in a very dangerous position, and it is exploited by the move E4, opening up an attack with this bishop on that rook. Now Amelia of course notices this and plays C6, or actually now that I'm thinking about it, she probably didn't. She probably just played this by just randomly. But anyways, C6 is played, getting the rook out of harm's way, even though it was kind of put there in the first place. But moving on, A4 is played. Not that this move does a whole lot, but at this position, Kiara is definitely in a better spot with more pawns pushed up, better control of the board. Now the move knight to A6 is played. Some of you may know the expression, a knight on the rim is grim, or dim, depending on how you say it, but either way, A6 is played. Next, Kiara plays pawn to B3, pawn to B6, and then rook to H3. Now, this is another move that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You don't really want to be moving your rooks out like that. But regardless. B7, knight to F3, rook to E6. Now, this move doesn't do a whole lot, so long as you protect the E4 pawn, because if not, it is hanging. And Kiara does not. She blunders, bishop to A3 is played, and of course the pawn on E4 is hanging. Now bishop takes E4 is played, however there is a much better move, and that is rook takes E4 with a check on the king. From there, king has to move, and then it's another free pawn, so that's two free pawns, and a very large advantage for the black pieces. But that's not what happened. What is played is bishop takes. Then Kiara plays pawn to D3, and this is a huge blunder. Watson plays bishop to F5, and this is a blunder. If you want to try finding out the correct move, feel free to pause the video, or don't. If you have found it, congratulations, you are an excellent subscriber and chess connoisseur. It is bishop captures on f3, capturing the knights, and the pawn cannot take this bishop because the rook with the discover check on the king. And you can play something like bishop to e2, defending the king. Then if queen captures, bishop captures, and then you are just up a queen and up a massive amount. But of course this was not played. Instead, went back all the way back. Bishop to f3. Still a check, still a discover check on the king, but doesn't quite have the same effect. Here, king moves, and then of course, I was going to say, of course, you capture the rook right here. Instead, rook to e4 is played, and you may be asking, couldn't you just capture that with the d3 pawn? Yes. But instead of that, the move knight to d4 is played. It is responded by bishop captures, and of course, the rook is still left uncaptured. Now the only move to get the rook out is of course rook captures on f4, but instead pushes a pawn, and finally the rook is captured. Now Kiara is in a much better spot. She's up 4 points of material, and things are looking great. f6 is played. King to c2 is played. Not a particularly productive move, but regardless, d6. And then here's the magic move. It is bishop captures on a6, capturing the knight. Now this knight has actually been hanging for quite a while, but it's finally found. And there is a very, very nasty attack coming up if black does not see it, which is the case. Knight to e4 is played, but the nasty move which I was talking about earlier, bishop to b5. This opens up a absolutely devastating attack on the black king. Blocks with pawn to c6, does not matter. Bishop captures, king is still in check with nowhere to move. The only move to be played is queen to d7, bishop captures, king captures. Now I said this attack is extremely deadly for a reason. At this point, white is up 23 points of material. That's the equivalent of being up 4 queens. Now, you may be saying, surely there's no way for white to lose this game. And, well, boy, do I have a surprise for you. Moving on. Queen to g4 check is played. Pawn blocks. Kiara pushes the pawn. Then bishop to g7 is played. Next, Kiara plays pawn captures, the best move. Then the king cannot capture it. d8 is played, and the knight is still hanging, but instead, knight to c6 is played, checking the black king. Then e8 is played, pawn captures, king captures, and then, of course, queen captures on e4. I'm just kidding, that is not what's played. Instead, a terrible, terrible blunder of queen to e6 is played. Then, of course, king captures there. And you've seen such a massive advantage blown in just one very, very unfortunate move. However, white is still in the lead by a little bit. Rook to a2 is played. Rook to c8. Then knight to d4, check. King moves to f6. And then bishop captures on d6. Now you may be thinking, can't the knight on e4 just capture that for free? Yes. Knight captures d6. And then Kiara puts her knight on the rim. Very grim, as always. king to e7, rook to a1 is played. Now you may notice after the move rook to a1 that the analysis bar goes very much in favor of black, and the reason for that is the move bishop captures d4 is opened up, and the pawn on c3 cannot capture because it is pinned by the rook. This cannot move, so it is just a free piece, and it is just a very, very nice move, which of course is not played. Instead, king to d7, and then rook to e1. Rook to f6 is played, however, as mentioned earlier, this is just another blunder because the move bishop captures d4 is missed once again. And then once again, yet another blunder, knights to f3. And now, what was already a very strong attack goes into an absolutely devastating one by a beautiful sequence by Amelia Watson. It is rook to c3. Now this move is extremely, extremely devastating. The bishop protects the rook so the king cannot capture. And now the king has to move, and you have a beautiful attack on the knights on f3. So after king moves, then of course you capture the knights, only you don't. And then you hang your rook because the king can now capture, it is no longer defended. Unfortunately, that is not played. Then even worse, pawn captures g5 is played. The best move here would be rook captures b3. Then you're pinning these two pieces, and it is just, would have been a very nice attack. Instead, pawn captures, and then, after a few more blunders, rook to b3 is played. Then knight to c2. And then, of course, yet another blunder, rook to b2. The best move would have been rook takes, and then you are just up. And then it is a much, much better position, but that's just not how it goes. Instead, she decides to pin the knights with rook to b2. And rook to e3 is played. King to c6. Rook to e6 is played, and then the move rook to b5 is played. Now, this is, well, it's not great, because obviously pawn captures here is the... Yeah, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. King captures, and that is once again yet another blunder because the knight on d6 is hanging. It is, however, not captured. Rook to e5 is played, putting the king in check, but not taking advantage of the hanging knight. a6, and then d4. Now, you may be wondering why the bar in the left has once again black quite heavily favored. And the reason for that is, and once again, if you want to pause the video and try to find the right move. If you have found it, congratulations, you are once again an excellent subscriber. It is knight to c4, forking the king and the rook. Now this move would have been devastating after something like king to d3. Then, of course, knight captures, and this is just, once again, a very, very scary move. And believe it or not, it is actually played. I was just so used to saying what could have been that when an actual very, very good move is played, I don't even notice it. But yes, of course, the fork is played. Not that I'm entirely convinced that either player knows what a fork is, but it is a very, very, very nice move. King to e4, knight to c4, knight to c6, knight to d6, king to d5, knight to b5. At this point, they're kind of just moving the knights around, checking each other, but not really accomplishing a whole lot. King to a7, knight to d7, knight to c3, king to d6, king to b7, pawn to h4, and then the move b5 is played. Now the best move here would have been just pushing the pawn up, trying to get the promotion, but they did say that they don't actually know about promotions until they actually accidentally do promote one of their pawns. So yeah, that's just kind of what it is. But moving on, knight to b5, king to d5, and then the pawn starts getting pushed, and then the move h5 is a blunder. Because what you want to do is you need to defend against the promotion, and how it's going to work is black would get the queen first, and then it would have been game over. But some shenanigans happen. e5, h4, king to e6, h3, king to e7, h2, king to d8, and then, well, the chess engine has h1 promoting to rook as the best move, with h1 promoting to queen as an alternative. If memory serves me right, I believe Amelia said something along the lines of, I could have promoted into a queen, but I have a very specific strategy. And if her strategy was to make this game last another half hour, then congratulations, but there is never any reason to not promote into a queen unless you're promoting into a knight for a very, very specific strategy. But regardless, she promotes a pawn into a rook, which is kind of yikes from a lot of situations. And at this point, the game is over. In the next few moves, obviously, whatever white does, let's say she pushes the pawn, and then rook to g3, or rook to g1 is obviously the move. And you cannot protect this pawn no matter what you do. Even, let's say, something like king to e8, then you just capture, and then that's just game over. Of course, that's not what's played. Instead, d1 is played, and then g7, pawn to a3, leaving open the window for Kiara to promote to a queen. And now, this is very much in Kiara's favor because she has a queen, and well, Amelia has a rook, so very much white favorite here. The move a2 is played, and a massive blunder of queen to d5. And if you don't know why this is a terrible move, then you're probably somewhat new to chess. Obviously, rook captures is the move there. And now this game is more or less officially over. King to e8 is played. Finally, we promote to a queen this time. Very nice. Then knight to f8 is played. Then queen to e1. Now there is a mate in 2, and the sequence is as follows. Queen to f6, and then no matter what, I mean, maybe something like knight to e6, and then a fork, then knight to c7 with a forced capture here with knight captures on c7, but then the move rook to d8 is checkmate. And that is the game. Thanks for watching, and of course I'm just kidding. Instead of this sequence, which admittedly is somewhat hard to find for a beginner, the game goes on for nearly another 50 moves. So I'm just gonna kind of speed run through these until a very large blunder is played. Next to b6, queen to e1, king to e7, queen to e4, king to f6, next to d6, king to e7, next to f5, king to e8, rook to e5. And here, the move queen to e7 could have been checkmate, but it wasn't. Rook to e5, king to e8, then rook captures, king to d7, queen to d8, and now, of course, she has hung the rook with king captures on e6. Then e4 is played, defending knights, king to f6, rook, knight to a4, king to f7, queen to f4, king to e7, b5, king to e8, b4, king to a4, queen to f8, king to e7, queen to f7, king to e6, queen to f6, king to e5, rook to f5, king to e4, rook to e3, and this is just kind of a sequence that has no real meaning. Eventually the pawn is finally pushed, and she turns it into another rook. note to future chess scholars: don't promote to a rook ever, 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 unless you really want to flex. But something tells me that wasn't her intention here. Then the move King to G1 is played. Now there is a mate in 2 here. Really something like Queen to C3, then something like H3, checkmate. But the move H6 is played. King to D3, rook to G1, and then the move King to F2, forking the knights and the. And the move King to F2 is played, and then rook to G6, King to F3, Queen to H1, and now Kiara can actually capture the knights on E3, but it's still a rook and a queen, so this should be over soon, or so you'd think. Rook to D6, King to D4, Queen to G1, King to D5, rook to D6, King to D4, Queen to D1, King to D5, rook to D5, King to D6. Queen to D1, King to D7, Queen to D5, rook to F, King to F6, rook to D6, Queen to D7, Queen to D4, King to F7, Queen to D4, King to D8, King to D8, King to D8, Queen to D, Queen to D, Queen to D7, King to D8. Please let this be over, is what a lot of the chat was saying. Rook D6, Queen to F8, rook to D6, King to D8, rook to F8. The play is rook to D8 checkmate, but no. King to D7, knight D6, King to F7. I feel like I'm not going too much. Queen to E8, King to G7, rook to G6, King to H7, and finally, the move Queen to G8 is played with checkmate. Oh, my throat hurts. I've been doing this for like half an hour. Anyways, that is the game. Thank you all very much for watching this very, very beautiful chess game between Watson Amelia and Takanashi Kiara. So yeah, I mean, again, I've made a lot of jokes this whole game, but it was very fun to watch, even if it was a bit frustrating at times. I do hope that they play more chess like this. Hopefully, maybe they start playing for more serious and they start learning a little bit, because chess is a very, very fun experience. It's a very fun game, believe it or not. And I'm very much enjoy playing chess. I enjoy watching chess. So again, this was a very, very fun thing to watch, even if it wasn't exactly the most professional game of chess. So that's that. Thank you very much for watching, and have an excellent day.